Hello everybody, I'm Brian Bowen with AgriVision Equipment Group. Today I want to talk about some differences between our traditional rigid frame drapers and our new hinge frame drapers as we're standing by our HDF. The first thing you'll notice is up here on the single point, these HDFs are ran with a 9-pin connector as opposed to our traditional 31-pin connector that would have been ran through our single point. A couple things I want you to notice here. There's a snap ring on the back and we want to make sure that's seated in nice and tight, because if we lose any connection here, we will lose communication with the controller on our head and we will lose all functionality. On your HDF headers, as you walk across from the single point, you'll notice there's a handle and a push button on each side of the header. Some things to watch out here is this handle, we want to leave in the open position all the time. The only reason that we would ever close this is in service mode where you know you're going to work under the head, and this will 100% lock out the hydraulics so the wings cannot move. The next thing is this push button valve. There's two modes, there's trailer mode and there's field mode. If you push the button in and turn it all the way to the right, that's field mode or off the trailer mode. If you push it in and turn it all the way to the left, that'll be in trailer mode. So what trailer mode does, and I'll do that here real fast, is it lets the wings take the shape of the trailer. So then they can rest down, shape of the trailer, we tie the trailer down, and now that head's not going to be bouncing, it's not going to be locked, the weight's not going to shift to the center of the trailer. So once we have that on trailer mode, we can lock it down. We go to take it off, we're going to switch it back, put it in field mode, pick up the head off the trailer, and then hook up our single point. On each end of our header, we're going to have a turnbuckle. We want to back this turnbuckle all the way out so it releases our cutter bar into flexible position. If we have that tightened all the way up, it'll look very rigid and we'll only have the hinge part of the draper. If we undo this turnbuckle, we can release that into flexible cutter bar position. Now that we're in the combine, we need to check a few calibrations before we get going with this header. So if we go to Menu, Calibrations and Procedures, and then come down to Header. The really important ones are on the combine side of the feeder house. So tilt range, speed, raise speed, and fore and aft. If any of those are not calibrated very well, we're going to have marginal performance with our HDF header. So do those before we can really get going with this head. Next, we would typically do a header calibration. Since these headers have controllers on them, they are calibrated from the factory. I would not advise doing these calibrations unless you have replaced any parts or having performance issues, but if you do, just make sure you are in a very level spot. Concrete pad, very level spot inside a driveway, something like that, that you can calibrate this header and go through that calibration. Next, we'll go to our header settings. So we'll hit our header tab at the bottom. And some things that I want to point out. One, let's make sure it notices that we're a hinge draper. Like I said before, in that 9-pin connection, if we lose any communication with the header controller, this is where you would see that it would not recognize that it was actually a hinge draper. Then I have some sensitivities across here. They're going to default to 50. I set them at 70, so let's bump those up a little bit and start from there, and then you can adjust as you're in the field, but these should increase your performance. And then we'll go down to draper belt speed and downforce. So draper belt speed, pretty self-explanatory, we can check it and then change our speed. We want to make sure we're in standard and not in slow mode. And if you want to set these for different buttons on your hydro handle, engage whichever button you would like, so number 2 or number 3, and then change your belt speed, and that will save that to that button. Same thing with number 1. If you want a certain speed when you lift it up, hit number 1 and change that speed. Now we'll go into our downforce. To actually check on our downforce settings, we need to be in field mode, so I'm going to engage just the header and go into downforce. I'm going to touch the number 2 button on our hydro handle, and then you'll see our header downforce settings come up. We have very light, typical, heavy, and very heavy. And what that means is the weight that is applied onto the cutter bar. So if you have it in a very heavy situation, there's going to be more weight pushed off of the feeder house onto the front of the cutter bar. And the opposite, if you're in very light, you're going to take all the weight off of the cutter bar and put it back on the feeder house. It's basically going to increase or decrease the responsiveness. So on the heavy side, you're going to respond more, you're going to be engaged with the ground more, and on the light side, you're going to respond slower. Let's start in typical, and then we can go from there on how it is performing in the field. And again, to save our presets, I have number 2 set as typical, and then if I want to change number 3, I hit number 3, and then I can change whatever setting I want saved to number 3. Then we can go into advanced tuning. Once in here, we could adjust in between our very lights, and typicals. In between those settings, we can also independently change the wings. I don't advise changing this top one much, as we can change our other settings. But if you ever get in a situation where the center of your head is rising up and maybe not cutting as low as you'd like, we probably have too much downforce on each of our wings. So then we can bump those down a few percent, take some weight off of our wings, and then that will lower that center of that header. If you've got in here, you've played with some to try and get the header to perform better, and you're just unsure of what you want to do now, go ahead and just hit reset, and all of these settings will go back to the factory defaults that you started with. Let's go into our settings of our HDF header. We'll come up here to the arrow pointing at the dot. We'll make sure our features here are the ones that are currently installed on our machines. And then we'll go to wing leveling. At the top, we've got 2 settings for home position, or when you hit the number 1 to raise your header, how do you want your head to act? Do you want it to be flat or go to a smiling position? I prefer the smiling position, as it gives you a little more clearance whenever you're turning around on end rows or uneven terrain. We also want to have these 2 at the bottom checked, so it can return to the home position in from an up or down position. If you also need to raise your wings, you can hold this wing level, and you will have to hold it for a few seconds, and it will return back to this home position. For additional questions, please contact your local AgriVision equipment location. And from everybody at AgriVision Equipment, have a safe and happy harvest.